Welcome, everyone, to firstly, a happy United Nations Day. Today marks the anniversary of the Charter of the United Nations, and this is our first anniversary as MUN Cross Borders, celebrating this wonderful day, as both, of course, the United Nations recognizes, and very importantly, Resolution 77336, the Model UN resolution, recognizes that UN Day is also the day to celebrate Model United Nations. So we could not be happier have such an incredible group of speakers and supporters with us today to talk about both reflections of Model UN in the past year since the resolution, the role of the UN in youth engagement, and specifically in the most recent times also, the role of the documents stemming from the Summit for the Future, which have had a major impact on our common agenda and will continue to do so over the next couple of years. I won't take much longer. I will go straight to our two distinguished opening speakers, and that is Mr. Jorge Aranda, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Portugal to the United Nations, joining right now on his colleague's laptop, but do not let the name there fool you. And also, we're very, very happy to welcome as an opening speaker, Mr. Eliseu Chaves, who is the new Chief of Staff for the United Nations Youth Office. And he'll be following after Jorge discuss a bit about some of the UN Youth Office's initiatives. And we're very, very happy to have him join us, as indeed we had the ASG join us for our summit this year. After this, we'll have a small panel discussion. We have two of our speakers here. Vitorino will be joining us, as will Amen, who unfortunately camera isn't working, but we will be able to hear her very well. And so without further ado, thank you all to those joining and to those watching the recording. And Mr. Aranda, please, over to yourself. Thank you again for joining us once more.
Thank you once again for hosting this event and also for allowing us to participate again this year. It's very special. It's, as you said, it's also a very special day, the United Nations Day, but it's also a day where we can reflect and see also how far the resolution 77/336 has brought us. It's 1 year anniversary that we're celebrating, and we have the feeling that it already became a sort of a pillar for the Model UN community. So this resolution was a milestone recognizing the importance of the Model UN as a global educational tool. But we believe it's far more than that, because it's also a kind of a commitment to fostering youth engagement in the United Nations work. And also over this past year, we have witnessed the impact of both the UN and the Model UN simulations as we continue to empower this new generation of diplomats, activists, and global thinkers. And I'm so pleased to see here a lot of people have joined this event, but I also see here very familiar faces among the participants. So when this resolution was adopted, it was, I don't know if you are aware of that, but it was one of the most co-sponsored texts adopted by the General Assembly. And this gives us a great pleasure. And it also showcases the universal support and importance of this issue. This resolution sets the goal to broaden the applicability of the Model UN to society and also to deepen its connection with the United Nations. So over the past year, we have seen this incredible momentum as Model UN conferences around the world have taken place, and as we saw how the simulation of the real-world discussions also help us to think better, to collaborate better, and also to innovate. Now, this brings together, as we know, students, educators, and policymakers, and we believe that the community's role of the Model UN as an educational bridge is better reflected precisely in bringing together all these people. But there's also something that we have to today highlight, which is the fact that this resolution has also helped to build new partnerships between youth and member states, facilitating discussions on these most pressing issues that we face. Now, it's very important that the discussions are done when youth is involved and participating. But even more important than that, obviously, is to have discussions where youth can also have a role in the decision shaping of the decisions that are being analyzed and promoted. So with this, I want to say that youth, as we regard in this endeavor, is no longer just a participant. It's a contributor. It's an advocate for change. And what we want also with this to improve is the ability of youth to influence policy making, both inside the UN, but also outside. And hence the importance also of involving academia, civil society, and besides, obviously, member states. Now, this theme of youth participation is not new, as we know, but its significance is growing, as we saw, not at least during the discussions on the Pact for the Future. Over half of the population of the world is under the age of 30. So this means that we cannot ignore the perspectives of young people and younger people. And as we also acknowledge that they have a specific power in innovating, but also a specific power in driving issues which affect all of us, both young and old, from climate change to justice and equality, from disarmament to fighting all sorts of inequalities. So their voices must be heard, but not just in simulation rooms, also in the rooms of the United Nations where decisions are made. So now let's look into the future. We've been looking to the past over this year. How do we create spaces for youth to be not just involved, but actually an active part in such discussions? The success of this Model UN is in fostering this engagement is evident, and we should take all the advantage that we can from this model. And I'm confident that with the sustained support of Portugal and other member states, the Model UN can continue to serve as a platform for meaningful youth contributions. I already mentioned here the Pact for the Future, and this Pact for the Future and the documents which go along with it, the Global Digital Compact, but also the Future Generations Declaration, they are a unique opportunity to integrate the youth global policy making agenda into the more structured work of the United Nations. Why? Because the Pact for the Future already lays out a roadmap for a more inclusive, a more effective, and also a forward-looking multilateral system. So while looking into the future, we kind of have already a roadmap on which we can base our joint endeavors. So in the coming years, we will see and hopefully also actively contribute to the implementation of this pact. And we would like to take this as an opportunity to leverage the Model UN strength to support the efforts of such an implementation. Why? Because Model UN offers a very practical framework for young people to understand the complexity of such issues and also to explore solutions to this global challenge, which were duly identified in this very important document. So initiatives such as the upcoming Model UN Summit in 2025 provide us an opportunity to further explore the ways how we can contribute to implementing this Pact's vision even beyond the horizon of 2030. So Portugal is very pleased to support in 2025 the Model UN Summit. We hope that it will contribute to bringing together students, but also educators, diplomats, and experts from all around the world. This summit will be a platform for youth, for sure, but they will advocate not just their ideas and solutions, but we hope that they will engage effectively with member states and UN agencies, how we can all collectively work towards the achievement of, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals, but also the broader agenda of the Pact for the Future. Now, this summit will also provide us an opportunity to reflect on our work here, on how the Model UN has evolved over the years, examine its current role in shaping global dialogue, but also maybe cast a roadmap for the future to ensure that Model UN continues to be a valuable tool for fostering these partnerships in international affairs. So we are very pleased to see it's happening. And in closing, I would just like to thank everyone for joining us here today and waving this flag for your commitment to empowering youth and supporting the future of Model UN. And as we look into the future, we remain committed to nurturing the next generation of global leaders and all of those who will take the baton and continue to work towards a more just, equitable, and peaceful world. All the best for your work, not just here on this webinar, but beyond today, the day of the United Nations, and throughout the months to come, all the way up to this Model UN Summit in 2025. Thank you once again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Small little digital round of applause there. Thank you very much, George. It's an absolute pleasure to work with you and Vitorino and the Portuguese delegation. It's been many years we've been in contact, and every time has been a wonderful moment. So thank you again. Just to mention as well, Resolution 77336 was a big step, but it is one of many steps where youth have been strengthened in the United Nations system. And one of the most significant developments has indeed been the UN Youth Office. Stemming, of course, from the Secretary General's representative on youth, it has now grown into a fully fledged office with Assistant Secretary General Felipe Polier. And we're extremely welcome to invite the new Chief of Staff for the UN Youth Office, Mr. Elizabeth Chavez, to also have some opening remarks with us. And so, Mr. Chavez, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Felipe, for the opportunity, and all the UNers across borders and the mission of Portugal to the UN for convening and supporting this event during such a special day as it is today, the UN Day. So it's really very much appreciated to be part of this event with all of you. My name is Eliseu Chavez. Felipe introduced. I'm a new Chief of Staff. I started last week, but I feel really proud to have a chance to interact with such an important movement like the Model UN movement. You know that, and Felipe mentioned that, and Vitorino as well from the mission of Portugal. The Youth Office was created in 2022 as such. It was before that we had the Special Envoy Office. So it was expanded. We are very thankful because it was decided by member states that we needed to have dedicated United Nations Youth Office within the UN Secretariat. And the office has a very complex but very exciting task to make sure that we have a convening mandate in the UN and also an enabling space for the young people to be part of the global processes across peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. It was the first, it's interesting to recall that it was the first Our Common Agenda recommendation that was operationalized. And again, it shows the commitment of member states to the youth agenda across the board. Now, when we think about the youth engagement, we have to acknowledge that now, I think with more conflicts than at any time since 1945, we have a very challenging global context and institutional challenges, and often inaction is deepening the trust deficit, especially among young people in public institutions and in traditional mechanisms, and because often they feel excluded from decision-making processes. So our collective challenge is to reaffirm and often really to clarify about the UN's founding mission to unite stakeholders in tackling global challenges and trying to find collective solutions, stressing this urgency of working together for a much more inclusive and multilateral solution for common problems. In the case of the office, we are here to advocate for youth inclusive initiatives, including especially, and here the Model UN, that have really helped for years to restore faith in institutions, educating young people, but also educating the different societies about the importance of multilateralism. And I think that's really a very important added value of the model UNs in so many countries. By doing that, we are being able to emphasize the critical role of young leaders in challenging the status quo and advancing a more sustainable and peaceful future, which is our common aspiration. We all know, and Vitorino mentioned that, but I think in a world where we have half of the population under 30 years, I think promoting peace, human rights, and achieving sustainable development goals by 2030 is more urgent than ever. And we need to make sure that we can really reiterate the meaningful youth engagement as a foundation for everything that we do. We cannot take for granted that youth engagement is there. It's really not present in many situations that it should be. And part of our role as the UN Youth Office is really to pursue meaningful youth engagement with member states, different stakeholders. And again, coming back to the model UN, we welcome the recent GA resolution as a recognition of this historical platform that foster dialogue and global solidarity in so many countries for years and years. We need still to work together, and I think the model UNs help to do it, to advocate for the removal of barriers, whether it's financial, logistical, to ensure that model UN is inclusive and representative. And I think it's important to continue encouraging you to reflect the diversity of the world's youth, enriching this experience and the unique perspectives on global issues that the model UN provides. Just some reflections that on the Summit of the Future that took place some weeks ago. We were able, and I was not there, but our team here did a tremendous work in mobilizing young people and partners in the organization of the Action Day, especially on Friday, the September 20th. There was a dedicated Youth Action Day around the voices of youth in the multilateral system, recognizing young people and youth as key participants, not only in the future, but in the present, and re-emphasizing the importance of global cooperation. And I think that really resonated across the Summit of the Future. We had more than 2,500 participants registered to attend the Action Days, young people registered, making it the largest ever UN organized convening of young people at the UN headquarters in history. In addition to co-shaping the youth-led day, young people were also part of the program of the Summit of the Future itself, and we are now discussing the follow-up with different parts of the UN system. The outcome document, and is very important to recall, had 28 recommendations across 6 priority areas identified by youth, including gender equality for adolescent girls and young women, inclusive digital future for all, foresight in climate and environmental sustainability, governance for human rights, peace and security and political processes, and innovative solutions in humanitarian action. We are now working to develop an action plan to implement the recommendations with checkpoints proposed during the ECOSOC Youth Forum and the first town hall to take place next year, 2025. Now, as a conclusion, we really wanted to reiterate our support for the model UN as a platform to help rebuilding trust in institutions, especially public institutions, and multilateralism, with having youth at the center of multilateralism. So thank you so much. We hope that we can continue to engage with you. I also wanted to acknowledge the presence of so many young people and my colleagues here from the office as well, particularly that are working for a long time with you and working during the Summit of the Future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chavez. A real pleasure to have you with us. And of course, if this is one of your first events related to Mod UN as Chief of Staff, then I want to say somewhat cheekily on behalf of the community, welcome. It's going to be an absolute pleasure to work with you. And of course, it's fantastic to see also one of your colleagues, Hilda Moral, who's been of great support to both us and MUNs across the world. So thank you both to Mr. Chavez and to Mr. Aranda for joining us, for opening our discussion. And of course, it is UN Day, so it's a very busy day for these individuals. So they won't necessarily be joining us for the rest of the sessions. But I am very happy now that we can also open and discuss our panel. So I'll quickly introduce the speakers of our panel discussion. They will have very short opening remarks, only a few minutes, just to get into it. I will have a couple of questions for them, and then it is about you, all of you joining here. Unfortunately, if you're watching a recording, it's going to be a bit harder to get your question, but I'm sure we'll manage to at the summit next year. To quickly introduce the speakers we have, you have seen his name, but now his face here, Vitorino Oliveira, who is the first secretary to the Permanent Mission of Portugal and an assistant professor adjunct, a PhD candidate in economics and finance, as well as being one of the main supporters and a really key part of the whole team who keep Model UN at the heart of UN, the UN system. Equally, joining us, we have Yannick da Costa, who is the Councillor for Social, Cultural and Humanitarian Affairs at the Permanent Mission of Jamaica to the United Nations. Again, a member of the core group of the resolution. We have almost all of them. We have a majority of the core group represented, should I say. And she assumed her duties in August 2021, and she represents Jamaica in the third committee and has responsibility in ECOSOC for issues also relating to youth and social affairs. Thank you very much for joining us. From a UN youth representative perspective, we're very, very proud to have with us Aman Mesele, who is the United Nations youth representative for Ethiopia. And she's a global studies and international relations graduate and also a major in economics. She's a youth ambassador to UNICEF Ethiopia and as a leader of youth advocacy groups, has been very passionate about media and human rights for many years now. And she's part of the African Union Youth Delegate Program in Ethiopia and is a champion of the youth peace security, meaningful youth engagement, which is very important, and was heavily involved in the Summit of the Future as well. So we're very, very happy to have her represented here today. Not entirely sure if her camera will work, but either way, we'll definitely hear from her. And thank you again for joining us. And last but by no means least, we do have Gala Matos, who is the third secretary at the Permanent Mission of the Dominican Republic to the UN, also following third committee roles and being part of that core group who supported the MUN resolution. And I will, of course, mention and say that Romaral Quintia, apologies, is part of the UN Youth Office, has been a key figure in the office since its very beginning. We had the absolute pleasure to meet earlier this year in New York, so thank you all. Mirroring a little bit the opening statements at the beginning with Mr. Aranda and Mr. Chavez, we'll go very quickly to Vitorino, followed by Aman, Gala, Yannick, and then we will really open the discussion. Thank you once again to George and Lizou for joining us. Please, if you need to continue with the day, it was a pleasure to have you here. And Vitorino, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philippe, and thank you everyone for the kind words. It is a pleasure to discuss the power of Model UN to engage youth in the UN system, in multilateralism. And I was trying, when preparing for this panel, I was trying to get some key messages to try to structure a little bit what's the especially with the Pact for the Future, the adoption of the Pact for the Future, the whole enthusiasm with the Summit of the Future. What's the role of Model UNs in the middle of all of this? From the experience of being a diplomat in the past 4 years here in New York, I would say that Model UNs are important for a myriad of things, and I try to highlight the most important ones. One is that you see a lot of diplomats that have had that experience of working in Model UN, challenges, initiatives, and so it can be seen as an important step to capacitate, to educate future diplomats, which in itself, so it's an education tool. The second important aspect with Model UNs is that it helps us understand the importance of multilateralism, the importance of negotiating with other countries, and the difficulty of doing that. And so going through Model UNs allows any professional, any student around the world to understand the importance of negotiation of these key challenges that we all face. And it's not just in the UN that we fix these challenges. We all know too well that, for instance, look at the 2030 agenda. You have the private sector, academia, youth organizations, NGOs, developing amazing projects that help address these global challenges that we also discuss in the UN. And going through an experience such as Model UNs help capacitate also in this regard of negotiations, of opening up our minds to these global challenges. And the third and last point that I wanted to mention is, with the resolution that we adopted 1 year ago on Model UN, where we recognize the importance of Model UN, we called specifically to member states and civil society as a whole and the UN system to create these very concrete, tangible examples of how youth can participate in UN processes. And Model UN is first and foremost the key example of youth participation. So that's why we are proud to support it. Just a final word on the summit of the future and how we can look at Model UNs through that lens as well. To say that, of course, the Pact for the Future and the Declaration on Future Generations, and Yannick can speak well about that because she facilitated that process, and the Global Digital Compact and so on. So these were very long, lengthy negotiations that could be inspiring for any Model UN organization to simulate or to look at specific chapters or actions from the Pact for the Future and encourage participants in Model UNs to follow up, to come up with creative ideas, not just for the sake of, having a topic for the Model UN, but also to bring these ideas to the UN and express these views as a way of influencing the negotiations that take place in New York. So this is an important aspect. The key challenges that we have are very evident. It's the lack of influential platforms for youth to come up with their ideas, but Model UNs presents that opportunity. And the limitations that we find in funding, in raising awareness of Model UN conferences that we hope to be able to address in the years to come. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vitorino, for that fantastic overview of it from someone who's really worked on the inside to it. I'd like to come to Amin now, maybe more from a youth delegate perspective. So obviously, the Summit of the Future, the Declaration of Future Generations was posited as a major stepping stone for youth engagement going forwards. And we'd love to hear your reflections on that, how you're feeling about that development is. And if you do have Model UN then experience, then definitely interested to hear that. But it's a bit more about some of those interplays that you found when you were there representing Ethiopia and indeed as part of the African Union Youth Delegate Program. Thank you very much for joining us, and please, over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. Actually, so in this side of the world, the time zone is very late. So I had a very long day. We celebrated UN Day at the UNECA here. Economic Commission. I was also able to present speech on my engagement in New York. So I'm pretty much saying the whole thing the whole day. So as you introduced me already, I am one of the 2 UN youth representatives for Ethiopia for this year, and of course representing civil society, because I wasn't able to get the final youth delegate badge. And as by now, most of you guys would understand that there's a huge lack of representation of Africans, specifically in the East African context. There are no official youth delegates that are joining such significant discussions, however, events. And that was pretty much my experience in New York this year as well. Again, so the program that's supporting me is known as the African UN Youth Delegates Program, and it's supported by the German Foreign Office. they found us through a local NGO in Germany called CRISP. And so with us implementing these programs here locally, one of the biggest challenges was, the lack of people who are well equipped, skilled enough to represent their countries as well. So we were one of the few people who were able to invest ourselves ahead of time. That's how we were selected.
Is it just myself who's lost connection with Amin? Okay, we'll wait a quick second. Amin, can you hear us? Okay, we will return to Amin once her connection restarts. Apologies everyone for that. That is the downsides of doing online discussions. And indeed, apologies for getting it so late for some people who are in other time zones of the world. That is a shame. That was a very interesting discussion on that front. We'll definitely get back to her, and we'll get to connection now. But in that case, Gala, I guess over to you a bit quicker than we had originally planned. Again, one of the core group who supported the resolution. Oh, no, I lied. Amin's back. Hello.
I'm so sorry.
No problem at all.
I just lost. Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. Please, over to you again. Oh, no. Oh, yep.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm back
Good.
right now. You can hear me
Wonderful.
well.
We can, please.
Perfect. Okay, I'm so sorry. So what I was saying, my colleague Kubran, who is part of actually was a part of MUN throughout his high school, which built really much really much of his knowledge in the international arena. So I am also one of the biggest fans of MUN programs, and because my friend Kubran is actually a medical student who's representing, who has he's very much aware of the international arena, negotiations, discussions, and he likes chairing. Now he's also being called to chair a huge MUN event. So I just wanted to say that, just to just drop that here. Besides that, in my engagement again in the Summit of the Future, and of course, since January, I've been able to go through every revision we draft related to the Pact, starting from the zero draft. And it was a huge, milestone for everyone here. Even though as also part of a few of the people who have their who show their sadness, because in the first draft, the zero draft was pretty much a very big comprehensive document, and the third draft was revision 3 was also one of the drafts that gave us much optimism. Because we saw a lot of things getting included, but now, I hope I'm audible. Am I? Okay. And now, we're still content. We're okay with the final draft, but the Pact for the Future is actually is going to be one of the ways states are not bad but committing, with all the energy, with all the optimism right there in the rooms. I was also able to witness the excitement of UN agencies right there. For example, the moment I heard that the Pact was adopted, I was sitting next to the UNICEF, a UNICEF staff there was working on international affairs. And it was a huge achievement for them to include children 26 times on the Pact for the Future. So this optimism is going to keep on pushing and accelerating the pace of implementation. So that's what that moment, the moment Pact was adopted, the optimism, the hope, and the strength that I saw in most of the UN agency representatives in the room, most of the youth right there, makes me optimistic about the outcome instead of the actual job. It shows that people have actual hopes to further push for this, and yes, I feel like that's also one of the biggest changes. That's one of the biggest documents that will actually be a source of change for our countries as well. Just to drop a few pointers on the Summit of the Future, it was by now you would understand in some rooms, like the rooms I was in when I was in New York, I've been the only in some rooms I was the only woman. In some rooms I was the only African woman, and in some of the rooms I was the youngest woman to join the rooms. And this shows that we still need to support younger women from different parts of the world through programs like MUN, of course, to be equipped and skilled enough to push further and forward and be able to advocate for the cause. I see a lot of women here. I've been also been able to meet Romero a couple of times online, and it's again very nice to see you here, and also here see Yannick. So this is also a platform where women are supposed to grow, and women are supposed to be motivated and pushed to go through. It's not really only about women, people with disabilities. I mean, there are very few of them right there. And of course, migrants, refugees, and the most neglected groups at this point are IDPs, which are locally displaced in different, and no one really cares about their opinions, even let alone international arenas, even in local matters. So I also suggest and also would like to recommend MUN to actually start focusing more further with the marginalized groups, intentionally working on them to support them to come up and push, starting from refugees. Again, I'm very passionate about IDPs as well, so I'm going to say it again: refugees, IDPs, people with disabilities, and women, so that they can be able to push further through the agendas, because they're also part of the world, part of the summit, part of the Pact. And that's what I wanted to say. That's something I really noted and wanted to reflect in terms of MUN. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And thank you so much. You raised some really, really powerful points there. Not just about, some of the good things MUN does, but challenging it. And that's really what we want to hear. So we'd love to hear more of that. And, we'll be discussing a lot of these in our summit next year. We hope to invite you back for that. And thank you again for joining us. It's much appreciated. I would definitely be asking a question a bit more about how we can include that a bit later. But before we get to the questions, I would love to hear from some of the rest of the speakers. So next we have Gala Macos from the permanent representation of the Dominican Republic to the United Nations, also the Third Committee, also a core group member, and also, of course, here from a different regional perspective, which is always very, very welcome in the world of Model UN. So please, Gala, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Philippe, and thank you for hosting this event. Good afternoon, excellencies, panelists, colleagues, and all the participants through this virtual world. Also, a special thanks to the Permanent Mission of Portugal for always being a valuable and reliable partner in keeping youth at the forefront of our work here in the UN. And congratulations to everybody for the first anniversary of the resolution, and happy UN Day as well. As we welcome the Pact of the Future and its annexes, we're really honored to be here and part of this dialogue today, this multi-stakeholder dialogue. Thank you, Amen, for your intervention right now. We are always looking for better ways to promote the participation of young people in dialogues and decision-making processes. And we've always said that Model UN is a great way to establish this link between youth perspectives and the day-to-day work that we do here. This coordination can act as a stimulator for the implementation of, if not all, because we always like to see youth as mainstreamed in all of the aspects of UN, but if not in all, but number of actions of the Pact. So I kind of divided how we can see the coordination in different areas of the Pact, and how the Pact can help stimulate a more engaged engagement from youth through Model UN. First, the Pact has measurable goals. It has numerous and detailed actions, which allows for a direct comparison between Model UN activities and the actual objectives of the Pact and of the membership of the UN and of the UN as a whole. For example, how well do Model UN simulations prepare students to contribute to a specific action outlined in the Pact? This is a far more specific and testable question, for example, than does capacity building of students in Model UN help eradicate poverty, for example. This leads me to actionable framework. So the Pact isn't just statements of principles, it also includes specific actionable steps for its implementation. So we can facilitate ways to measure the potential of Model UN. The Pact details actions, for example, related to climate change, poverty reduction. Model UN simulations can be designed to address these specific actions, and their success can be evaluated on how effectively they equip the participants of this Model UN in understanding the relevant actions. Also, the Pact it's explicitly forward-looking. It's beyond 2030. It doesn't have a specific end date, and not giving a deadline to the document can, in positive ways, give more realistic implementations and a space to bring time to bring in ideas and different perspectives for these realistic implementations. So for example, through Model UN, you can have long-term goals aiming to cultivate future leaders in this Model UN in international affairs. They can have long-term projects. This could motivate youth participation in global affairs, knowing that whatever they are talking about today has a long-term effect looking forward. Also, something we always talk about is the interconnectedness of the issues. And this is something that the Pact recognizes and highlights very well, the interconnected nature of global challenges. This could give Model UN simulations that use the Pact a framework that can effectively reflect this interconnectedness, which can foster a more holistic understanding of global issues, and therefore motivate a holistic approach in youth participation in these spaces. And the actual focus on youth of the Pact is extremely important, and in there, and especially Yannick can talk more about this, but especially the Declaration of Future Generations calls for greater youth engagement, and this is directly linked to the Model UN's core function of engaging youth in these spaces, international issues, in order to eventually, or now, or that's what we're trying to do, to become actual agents of change and bring their perspectives to spaces that have an impact, and conversations and dialogues like this one that we're having right now, in order to contribute and strengthen the collaboration between both. So we see the Pact as a roadmap, a detailed roadmap that has very defined objectives and can be easily applied to the Model UN work. We had this dialogue at the beginning of last year when we were doing this resolution as well, is how can we better reflect what we're doing here day to day and what we see, what we talk about every day in the Model UN's simulations and everyday work? How can it be how can we make sure that it is very well coordinated and that there is a very good coherence between these. As a regional perspective, an example that I can give is we have in the Dominican Republic programs like there's one that's called Oportunidad 1424, which is Opportunity 1424, which provides support and reintegration services and brings marginalized groups, as Amen was also talking about, to and voices to spaces where they can participate more actively and therefore can participate in spaces that can influence in policy making and so on. But I think I'll leave it there. And thank you, dear Philippe and colleagues.
Thank you very much. Indeed, a lot of questions I think raised there, but also some very exciting opportunities. And so, Yannick, not to put you on the spot here, but we have talked a little bit about some of the practical ways that we can maybe answer these questions in relation to Model UN and others. So, I almost want to keep Gala's, and indeed returning to everyone's conversation on with yours in looking at sort of next steps. It's been a year. We have, for the most part, looked at, I think it's 13 articles. They've had an impact in their various levels. How can we get that deeper? And of course, questions always funding, but maybe outside of that, how can we work on getting that improved? Over to you.
Sure, no problem. First of all, hello, good afternoon, good morning, good night to all. And thank you, Philippe, for the kind invitation. And I'm very happy to see colleagues here. It's funny, we work very closely together, but we hardly ever actually see each other in person. So it's very nice to see your faces after so long. Of course, very many thanks to Portugal for setting the tone, as always, and for our newest friend from the UN Youth Office for joining and just getting right into the meat of the matter, feet first, and kind of just running with things, because I very strongly believe that the momentum hasn't waned any at all since the summit. And if anything else, I think even prior to we were ready as member states to even adopt, there was always this energy around the next step. And it's part of the beauty of going last on the panel is that most of your points have already been made. but just to catch on to a few of the things that were said, including on the next steps as you requested, there's no it cannot be said too often the kind of impact that this resolution, the Model UN resolution, has had on the system, not just for greater accessibility of Model UN groups. I mean, Portugal and Jamaica were proud to host the Wifuna International Model UN opening and closing ceremonies earlier this year, where I think we had a record numbers of students and advisors in the General Assembly Hall, being well apprised of the system itself, but also being awarded for their incredible roles, whether as chairs or having, participated in different capacities. And it was a beautiful thing to witness. It's a beautiful thing to see. But I think that's what I have to leave. Okay. Ciao to whoever's leaving. But it was an amazing thing to see. And we've also seen, as mentioned by a colleague from the youth office, where there have now been dedicated spaces in the past year for youth. Prior, you would have situations where youth are competing with space and time and visibility with member states, with civil society, etc. And I think in the past year, and certainly in the case of negotiating the negotiating processes leading up to the summit, we have seen where dedicated spaces have been created for youth. And I am very happy to say, and we say it all of the time, that the most concrete proposals we received in advancing these initiatives came from youth. They were the most organized, they were the most ambitious, they were the most clear in their defense, the rationale as to why certain things needed to be done. And none of that fell on deaf ears. so my colleagues referred to the Declaration on Future Generations. As mentioned, I was the focal point for my ambassador, who served as co-facilitator alongside with the former permanent representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And one thing we were keen to do, recognizing that member states, how the process is structured, the system itself is structured, you often get feedback and input and the voice of member states a little too late. We've already gone through the cycle with our capitals, etc., to create these positions. So by the time we come a little after and they're at the table, we've created these spaces and youth are now at the table, but we can't have that flexibility to hear and assimilate what they have to say. And so we thought it absolutely necessary to have them speak first in consultations, advise, share knowledge, share expertise, share aspirations, and then provide member states with this information in a concrete way, in black and white, in writing, to properly consider in their decision making. So that was one way. We like to think of this as a new best practice, and hopefully the system can see value in that sort of approach, whereby we can ensure that youth voices are heard. But in terms of the next steps and implementation, Model UN is perfect for this. So Vitorina would have gone through the whole structure and the purpose and the objectives of Model UN and the kind of impact it can continue to have. We have to remember, though, that the reason for this entire summit, the reason for the Pact, the GDC, the DFG, is not to create in terms of new issues. We're not addressing anything new. We are putting all of them in one place, clearly identifying, as Gala had said earlier, the fact that these are interconnected issues and challenges. Youth are very much throughout the core of this. They're underpinning every single issue that goes through. And we need to recognize how one decision we take in this instance has an impact in another. And so that is, I think, the primary purpose of these documents, to provide added impetus and to realize that we cannot keep doing things the way we're currently doing them. In terms of Model UN shifting and ensuring that you're moving with the tide for this, I think it would be good not only as to follow the initiatives that Gala had presented with you. Excuse me if you hear my ambassador's laugh, he's got Julie in the office today. But if you, not just the initiatives that she presented, but also to look at how the system itself intends to implement some of these things. We always look at the decision-making process and how initiatives and thoughts are put forward. But I think it would be interesting for Model UN to study exactly how the thoughts are being translated into action, how they're being, how it trickles down into actual daily lives, how the various Model UNs within the various jurisdictions, how they are advising the youth, but also providing the space for the young people to properly assimilate, but also pick it apart. We're having a process with our stakeholders here at the UN in unpacking the Pact, so to speak, and seeing how it's relevant to their context, and seeing how the system relates to their own jurisdictions, and how then they can also weigh in here, because at this point, member states are also doing the same. We're seeing how it applies to us. If the youth can also be prepared to meet us there, we have to take decisions on this later down. It's for me personally, it's not enough to see these and map out these engagements throughout the year, these high-level moments. These are key, but the work that is done leading up to those moments are equally, if not more important. And so I think Model UN, in terms of structuring itself and providing tools and resources to young persons, I think there would be value in taking a deeper look at how these decisions were actually made, the needs that drove a lot of these decisions, and the level of compromise that needs to be reached, or what consensus means. It's a more holistic view, I think, not just what happens within the halls, but behind the doors and even beyond the system itself, to take the entire multilateral framework into account. So I'll stop there because I know you have questions. That we'll probably go into a little bit further, a little bit deeper into some of these points.
Well, thank you so much, Ellie. It was a fantastic overview of the practical sides of things, and it's really going to put us on a good stead. I know that Gala might have to leave us now, and we had Carolina also mention that. It's a busy day. It is UN Day. And at least, Yannick, I also want to mention, a huge appreciation for your ambassador for the work he's done. He's been a great supporter of Model UN too. Before we get to questions, and I'm only going to ask one question so that everyone else has the most amount of time possible. So please do think of questions, put them in the chat, raise your hand. And I just want to give a few minutes to maybe Romeral, perhaps to just introduce a little bit more about what she mentioned, about what her chief of staff mentioned, her chief of staff, the UNUO chief of staff, as she's also been a really key figure in this. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Philippe, and thanks everyone. I think this is such a timely conversation, not only because of the day and the many celebration we have, but also because of the profiles and the different stakeholders you are bringing together. I think it's fantastic to really discuss among member states representative, the UN, but also youth, on how do we advance on the implementation of the pact and how this is linked to Model UN. And I don't want to repeat what our chief of staff already mentioned, but just to say that, and many of you actually on the panel already echo on and allude to certain avenues to actually make the connection. And I think this is one key aspect. I think we'll all need to look at it into how do we make and connect the dots together so that we don't work in silos in terms of the implementation of the pact. And this is also why I really want to again highlight the importance of connecting what Model UN is doing into the Pact of the Future implementation and into what we are also going to look into from the UN Youth Office into supporting that implementation as well. So in that sense, I think it was already mentioned, but there are a lot of opportunities there to also connect the global with national, local levels, especially through Model UN. So how can we leverage on the mobilization you have with young people on the ground, and how does that look into the implementation, but also to make sure that, as it was already mentioned by Yannick, it's relevant to them, and that can also come into the conversation of this forward-looking approach that the Pact has. So in that context, just also maybe to mention, you also asked me to introduce myself, but in the UN Youth Office, I work on youth engagement. So of course, I will be following up very closely on this implementation and how we can support not only on the actions of the Pact, but as Elise was mentioning as well, on the outcome document that came from the Youth Action Day that happened prior to the summit itself. There were a number of recommendations from young people that were even beyond the Pact itself. So how can we connect, again, those recommendations with an implementation phase and an accountability system? So we'll also be looking into that and see how, of course, Model UN will be also a vector there and a vehicle to implement and support to put into practice those recommendations so that it doesn't stay on paper. But I stop here and very happy again for the invitation and to support with the discussion. Thank you, Philippe.
Thank you so much, Romeral. So my question is all about capacity. And that's kind of with the understanding of, yes, obviously, youth is a significant part of the development of where the UN wants to go and engagement, but there is always that issue of capacity, not just within Secretariat or delegations or governments, also in civil society. And so I kind of want to ping for each of you, what are some of the main blockages in improving capacity? I might want to start with Amin on this, just because one of the key things we are trying to focus on with Model UN is exactly, as you said, the prevalence or lack of prevalence of Model UN in Africa, where there's a lot of interested youth. And I've gone to Africa to work with setting up conferences there, but it's always quite difficult to keep that relationship going. So, maybe starting with that question of capacity to Amin, how do you see the ability to engage more youth in civil society activities, not just Model UN, and who have been some helpful actors and maybe some less, obviously don't name names, less helpful actors in this world? And then I'd love to come to Fitrine and Yannick, to speak a bit about that capacity within the sort of member state system. How can you support more MUN youth? And maybe Romeral has any reflections on you from your front, because again, it's one of sort of 50 different priorities. It's always hard to find the right angles. That's my question, and this is a challenge to everyone else who's on the call. Please think of your questions. It would be great to get them here. Amin, please, over to you.
Thank you so much. So in terms of I understand the struggle to keep up conversations, connections from our part of the world, our continent. Uh, um, a lot of civil society organizations also lack support as they are. So one of the reasons that this part of the world is lagging behind is also that. So in the context of Africa, the main supporters of young people, specifically young people, to involve into civil society organizations, people pushing them into the system I mean, pretty much schools, like for example, better schools. Um, in my context, I went to a very decent Catholic school. It was not really a very rich school, but my school invested on my abilities to present myself, public speaking, getting involved in getting to capacity from even a lower level. And so they pushed us to extracurricular activities and further pushing us into this type of world, a connection arena, conversations, networking, and things like that. So to capacitate young people, to capacitate children, the future generations, to come to such arenas is mainly the main. I really believe that the main passage to them is definitely schools. Civil society organizations should intentionally start investing for their own schools around them, public schools, private schools, you name it, any type of schools. But in any type of schools, because schools are permanent establishments. You can go back and keep up the conversations, keep up the connections, and get to meet those children, those young generation you want to keep on investing on. So that's what I've been also telling a couple of people I met in New York as well. People want to keep up the conversations, but they struggle, and civil society organizations want to invest on young people, but they don't know how to. So a very good start would be schools. Schools, also higher education institutions. For example, a program coordinator from my program is it was part of MUN when she was in her freshman years, and she went to Nairobi. She went to New York, in MUN engagement. So further, she was interested in this arena and was able to understand furthermore on how things operate in this part of the multilateral space. So higher institutions, schools, uh, definitely these two establishments are always existing, always there, always around, closer to younger generation, more than any other institutions in the world. I know most children and many children might not be able to access schools, but we can start from what we have right now so that we can expand these and further work on around this. I hope I answered your question. If that's
You did.
please let me know.
No, you definitely did. And it's interesting, we even had at our summit this year a proposal, if we want to make Model UN a serious thing, add it to the curriculum, which I know is a very difficult political discussion in many countries. But you're right, curricular and education at the very basic level is huge. So yeah, Vitorino, Yannick, we have this idea of, bringing in refugees for MUN, focusing on IDPs, internally displaced persons, focusing on those with disabilities or less ability. We want to do an MUN on that right now. It will take us 6 months. It will need 5 diplomats and, $80,000 to do it. What's the capacity? It's not as easy to get those sort of chunks together. How do you see improving the capacity of both in some ways the UN to handle Model UN, because there are millions who do it every year and not all of them can email all at once, and also Model UN in some ways to engage better with the UN? I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe Vitorino, because it's been a while since the beginning of the discussion. Apologies for that. But then Yannick, I'd love to hear from you.
I will always let Yannick go first. So
there we are then. There we are.
Go ahead, Yannick, and I'll follow you.
And here I was thinking that Vitorino being our 5C colleague among us, among other things, that knows the ins and outs of the budgetary constraints and challenges of the UN system would be the one to take this on. But I can speak from MCA perspective because I don't follow the numbers of the system. Recognizing, however, that we are increasingly limited in what we can do. Not that we don't have the political will to do it, but we have so very limited resources and so many global challenges to solve all at the same time. In terms of capacity as a whole, in investing in youth, when investing in Model UN and ensuring that Model UN plays the kind of role that we envision for it within our various systems. We have seen in recent times, especially, that the UN country offices have sort of begun to provide more support to Model UN frameworks. We're happy to say that even more recently, leading up to the summit, the UN office, the UN country team thought it necessary to not just engage youth, but the different schools and clubs to give an idea and to have my ambassador brief them on the Summit of the Future and what it would actually mean for young people. And of course, to propel the broadening of the curriculum and into the various communities. The challenge we have in supporting a lot of these is that there are so many competing priorities. We, especially since COVID, have had a challenge in accessing all of our young people since that time in terms of getting them back into the systems. And institutions like Model UN and other community programs and so on are usually how we as a small state utilize or try to mainstream certain values and thinking and empowerment tools to our young people especially, and so they can become well-thinking citizens and contribute naturally to society. And so I think perhaps that might be one of our limitations in capacity, but also we have to decide, in our case, where we have the whole idea of the triple planetary crisis, we have to also decide, are we in a recovery mode or are we in an advancement mode? And a lot of the times, almost cyclically, we have to deal with the regular challenges each year of having to be constantly recovering from disasters. So there's so many things that are interconnected, overlapping, but I think at the end of the day, it's a matter of trying to prioritize and, as Ahmed said, using what you have to do what you can now. Education is a major tool. I'm happy to hear a youth delegate speaking to this, and I'm happy to have heard prior to her saying that a lot of the times only few are selected because few are equipped. And that's a real challenge if our next generation of decision makers and policymakers aren't well equipped, aren't well educated, qualified to be who they need to be for themselves, not even for us, not even for those that took decisions on their behalf, but for themselves, then we have a real challenge. So certainly scaling up investment in any way, shape, or form that we can. Investment, whether that means in cash, in terms of providing institutions, etc., sure. But investment in terms of even like the human side of things, passing on knowledge, intergenerational dialogue, yes, but intergenerational equity in the entirety of its sense, its whole essence. Passing on the same morals and values, but also empowering young people to in a way that says, yes, this is what we've learned, these are the lessons learned, but we know and we're confident in the fact that you can take it another step further to meet the challenges of tomorrow, not just ours. I'm hoping in some way I addressed your capacity challenge, at least from a small state perspective. There are many, but with the little that we do have, and while addressing competing challenges, even some challenges that seem far removed from us, but actually directly impact us in so many small but significant ways. At the end of the day, we do recognize that the next generation and future generations will need us to make sacrifices today in order to implement certain things so that they have a foundation to actually succeed.
Very powerful.
My 2 cents.
No, yes, thank you. Vitorino.
Thank you. I mean, after Yannick, it's always hard to go, but that's also why I picked Yannick to go first. But I'm gonna try to organize some ideas. I think for member states, there's Well, first of all, we need to work at our national level. So it's a work that we don't necessarily show off here in New York, but we need to work with our education systems. I think it would be incredibly powerful to include in national curricula the possibility to that the participation in Model UN has credits recognized in the training of students, not just as an extracurricular activity, but having Model UN participation as something that can enrich the curricula of every student. We've been trying to do, at least on Portugal's side, to support every single club in our universities, less so in high schools because the capillarity is so big, but at least in the universities, the creation of Model UN clubs or international relations clubs that can promote discussions or debates or negotiations as Model UNs do. And then support the networks that emerge. So last year, for instance, Portugal, I think it was last year, we created a UN association in Portugal that promotes the goals of the UN, of course, but has as a very strong pillar the organization of Model UN conferences around the country, an organization like MUNers Across Borders, of course, and I'm not saying this just because Philippe is organizing this event, but it's incredibly powerful. The Model UN Summit is important for Model UN organizations to come together and for people who have never done Model UN to come together, understand, learn with those that have organized already some initiatives. And I was seeing a question on the chat. So these are precisely the formats, the forums where we can connect, network, and get to learn how to organize a Model UN in our own country, in our own university, and so on. So these networks are important. The My MUN platform is incredibly helpful as well. The WAFUNA Federation, of course, it's very important because it connects these UN associations. So working with these networks, supporting them, including financially, of course, is important. And lastly, because of course, working with the system here in New York and the UN Youth Office and so on is important. We need to continue promoting initiatives such as the Model UN guides that DGC has created and translated into as many languages as possible, but also promoting conversations like this one, where we are able to come up with the issues that remain in raising awareness, more awareness about Model UN, and then encourage countries to learn more about this, because it's interesting because we have here some of the core group that launched the resolution last year on Model UN. But during the negotiations, we were able to understand that many countries never heard, or many colleagues never heard of Model UNs. It's not popular. It's never heard of in their experience as diplomats. And there was a lot of our work, Yannick's, Gala, myself, others, was to try to explain what Model UNs are, how important they are, and somehow this also helps or serves as an encouragement for diplomats to learn about Model UNs and try to replicate them or support them as best as possible in their own countries as well.
Thank you. It's a very good point. We have been lucky enough to also have almost trained and talked to some, diplomatic colleagues about what Model UN is. And I think it's a really, really valid point there, that it's both ways. It's both ways. It's also intergenerational. I do want to highlight some of the work that other UNAs have done on the intergenerationality of Model UN too. And it can really, be a whole side of it. I do, of course, want to give you a chance to answer the capacity question, Romeral, if you'd like to. And then we have a couple questions. I'll do my best to potentially sort of ask all three, and then we'll try and wrap up through that. So apologies, it's rather short term. But yes, Romeral, potentially on the capacity question, UNUO is quite new, and yet still, maybe somewhat unfairly, we've asked you to do so much on Model UN already. And how are your feelings about the capacity of course, you don't say too much, but the Secretariat and where that might be evolving, and maybe the question should also be, how can we take some more of that responsibility and activities on our own?
Thank you, Philippe. Maybe one consideration that I want to bring here is how do we connect Model UN with the different youth groups, youth-led organizations on the ground that are then also advocating at the UN and global level, but sometimes are not so familiar with the processes of negotiation or, how it works very much inwards, but they do amazing work, of course, at the local community level, national, regional level, into transforming some of these bigger and like main challenges that we have been speaking about. So I think there could be an interesting space to explore on how we connect those groups. So I'm thinking very concretely during the Summit of the Future, the UN Youth Office has been supporting different groups of young people to come and attend, especially the action days prior to the summit. And again, all of them were doing very powerful work at the community level, aware to a certain extent of the UN processes, but I wonder how they would have also benefit to be connected with Model UN and understand the intrinsicies of those negotiations, for instance, in the context of the summit, so that they come really well equipped when they were traveling to New York, but also the other way around, Model UN being able to benefit probably from their work as well when we look now into the implementation phase, because we were also highlighting that aspect. So I think maybe that connection is something that the UN Youth Office could also strengthen there and really triangulate those efforts into the different groups and see how that can beneficiate one another. So I think that's one space I would particularly be interested to continue the conversation and see how we can work together on that.
Thank you. Our training officer, Kira, is actually in the call, so I will pitch that idea to her for sort of trainings we can do. When it comes to questions, thank you so much. I might quickly step in and answer the one from Kidist on how to participate in Model UN chapters. They're all over the place, I think, is one of the key things. They're a high school, they're a university. You don't always have to be a member of that university to go to it, but sometimes you do. And I guess one of the joys and difficulties of Model UN is they are all unique. Unique personalities, individuals, systems. There is only very tenuous links to all of it, and that is both its strength, because it is one of the largest youth extracurricular activities in the world. However, it is also quite difficult to get everyone together for that very reason. So I'm going to merge the last two questions that were in the group chat and kind of pitch it as a final question to you, which we'll hopefully use to wrap up the call. We started a few minutes late, so I'll end a few minutes late if that's okay. So there's one from Abigail, which is very much about, how can individuals really try and get involved with these international initiatives? And that's a question we always have, I must admit, but it's one I always keep going, really. And maybe in the context of we've had the Declaration of Future Generations, we've had an understanding and a very successful engagement with young people through DGC, through various organizations. What are right now some of the best fora to get involved as an individual? Not even necessarily just joining Model UN Club or, joining other ones. So that's the individual. And secondly, I'm going to rephrase it slightly. What specific commitments or initiatives that have just come out in the past month from the Summit of the Future do you believe will have the most impact, and are you the most hopeful for? There's two final questions there. One, in your opinion, what are some of the best ways to get involved as an individual in intergovernmental, just international sort of civil society? And don't just say Model UN because I'm here. And secondly, what are some of the most hopeful commitments that you've really seen that you're looking forward to following on? And Shrinka, I saw your final email about organizing a university. There's quite a few ones there. We'll happily take those perhaps at future events. I might go in reverse order, perhaps, Romaral, not to put you on the spot. I might go, I can see I just did, apologies. I might go to you first, and then yourself, Vitorino, Yannick, and then Ammon to end us off, if that's okay. Romero, please, over to you.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. First, on the question on how to engage or what is the path a little bit towards the global level sometimes, and how to connect there. I think there are different ways to do that. I mean, one, of course, is if you are part of an organization or a group that it's part of, I mean, there are large youth networks and organizations that are very much connected at the global level. So there are a lot of opportunities there to also check sometimes within your organization how they are connected with the global level and how to find that path. Another way that some of you mentioned as well is also to connect with the UN country teams in your countries as well. They might be able to also advise on which are the opportunities. At the UN Youth Office, we are always very happy to get into a call online and to give you a little bit of an overview. We have a monthly newsletters on youth-related events initiative that the UN is doing. So that's also a good way to keep yourself informed on what's happening. And there are a lot of opportunities for you also to engage, even if you are not part of an organization. Then, of course, I mean, we spoke about the MUN UN. There is the major group of children and youth. So there are larger, I would say, networks and groups and movements led by young people that are usually very well aware of the processes. So I think this could be one entry point, and I'm happy to also put my email if that's useful for some of you. Then on the second question, what are we the most hopeful? That's a really good question. And I think I would have a hard time deciding on one. I think, of course, for us, it was very exciting to see that there is a dedicated chapter within the Pact for the Future on youth and of course, the annex on future generations. So I think within there is a high potential also to enhance the youth participation in intergovernmental processes. So I think that can be like really a platform to strengthen and improve the meaningful youth engagement and how young people can influence also in different policy making and decision making processes. So that's something I know from the office we are particularly inspired and really keen to support. So that's the one I would pick, perhaps.
Thank you very much. Who did I say was next? I think it was Vitorino. Yes.
It's very easy because Romeral already gave all the examples as well. But yes, I think, participating in Model UNs is a great experience. Can't stop saying this. To be able to participate in UN initiatives, most often people look at the climate COPs, the Summit of the Future and its multiple side events, or the high level political forum. So these high level events where youth and civil society can participate and share their experiences, their initiatives, get to know others through these initiatives. That's always a great way to do it. But Romeral was also explaining about the intergovernmental processes. So the long negotiations that sometimes have, we have, of course, calls for inputs, written inputs, oral inputs, debates, discussions. And that's something that, has a lot of different areas to explore. All the areas of the UN try to do this, still imperfect. We still need to work more. And we are here to support the UN Youth Office also in this regard. That's for sure. Did you have another question, Philip, as well?
What are you hopeful for, Vitorino?
Which one?
What are you hopeful for? What are
the hope? No, that's the worst question to ask because it's.
I want to end all of the events we have with a little bit of hope.
A little bit of hope. I think the Pact for the Future has a very positive message that the UN is so it's one of these key milestones. So since I would risk saying since the adoption of the 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement and this very important year of 2015, we hadn't had the chance to have such an important, significant instrument being adopted by consensus, and the Pact offers that vision where the UN is still relevant in a lot of different areas. But there's a lot to do to reform the Security Council, to reform the international financial architecture, to prepare the UN to deal with AI, to accelerate climate action. And all of these areas are somehow daunting because, you know, there's many challenges nowadays, but they offer also hope because we are able to agree by consensus that this needs to be done. And now we need to act accordingly, and we need the support of everyone, including youth and including everyone on this call for sure.
And I'm sure you have that support from everyone on this call.
I
Hope
do.
so. If we don't, then I feel like we're a little far behind. Jenny, please.
Absolutely. And I'll be very, very quick. In terms of opportunities for individuals, if we're looking specifically at key opportunities and moments, definitely we are always in touch with the UN Youth Office, at least on the part of negotiation processes and so on. They have their finger on the pulse of all the advocacy moments, etc. We're also very closely in touch with the UN Foundation. They have a whole system of next generation fellows that put young people in a position not only to influence the processes, but also to lead them to chair some of these events and to really get a real touch of the diplomatic world, in the sense that a lot of the conversations young persons and persons outside of the system always feel take place at the table. A lot of the decisions are really made in the smaller moments, the moments after the meetings, the connections and relationships you form elsewhere. That's where a lot of the real influencing takes places through the networking processes. And so that's a really good way, I think, to expose our young people in Mother UN and otherwise to that. If you're looking specifically at aligning the work of the Model UN and aligning our young people in these spaces with what's coming up next for the Summit of the Future and its outcome and its implementations, one of the key outcomes of the UN Civil Society Conference that was meant to sort of rally support of stakeholders around or in support of the summit and its outcomes was the series of impact coalitions that were birthed from this meeting and carried forward in a more structured way by the co-chairs. So you can look into the various impact coalitions. The coalitions themselves take different bits and pieces of the summit, or not the summit, rather the pact. And we even have an impact coalition for future generations, shameless plug. This is where member states, advocates, organizations, UN entities, all can be a part and contribute. And they're working on their terms of reference, etc. So I think Model UN organizations themselves, I think, can become a part of these instances. And so I think you should take that opportunity. In terms of individuals, again, you can also look at the Coalition for the UN We Need. You can look at Global Governance Innovation Network, both of which are headed by a young person, Adar Yusuf, who's a co-chair for the UN Civil Society Conference. So that's for the individual opportunities. The next question on what am I most hopeful for, but also in terms of, I'm looking at this question here on the commitments or initiatives from the summit that I think would be the most significant impact on empowering youth globally, and also what I'm most hopeful for. Marrying the two in my mind. I am most hopeful for the fact that young persons will not necessarily see the text in black and white where we have youth mentioned as what empowers them, but the fact that they played a role in this process in bringing the document and the process to fruition by sharing their inputs and advocating in a very strong way, that they inherently feel empowered, not only to continue advocacy, but to act in terms of implementing in ways and means that they know how, with the tools that they do have, in creating solutions, practical solutions that mean well for them, for the people around them, their community, for the government, and eventually back to the multilateral system. That's my hope.
That's a very nice hope. Thank you. And I want to give you the last word to be able to really help. I mean, wrap everything up. I'm really happy that you're here, especially so late. To hear from you, Amen. You know, and obviously you're a great example of an individual who's now managed to really be a part of a fantastic program of the youth delegates. How can some individuals get involved, and what are you most hopeful for and see as the most impactful?
Honestly, I would really love to answer the second question, just that.
Go for it.
Because pretty much, from the start, it's the same thing everyone else has been mentioning. What I am very hopeful for is, as I said, the bright faces I saw the moment people thought something new was getting introduced. So something. The pact actually is something people were looking forward to, something new, some start that would push them to take one step. So that's what made me very hopeful from the start. And now, what I'm very hopeful for is I know a lot of young individuals like me who are trying to work their way up and make an impact for the future generation as well, so that the future generation also gets to make the decisions themselves, not just for ourselves, but also for the future generation. So whenever in any multiple occasions, also in the Civil Society Conference, in the UNGA High Level Week, in the Summit of the Future, whenever young people were organized, whatever we were talking about was about change. No one was talking about them, growing individually. It was not really personal for half of them. It was about people around them. It was something that they carried on their backs, a nation, countries. So that's what has made me very hopeful, and the passion, the love I see within the young people right now, wanting to serve their communities, to give back to the people around them. So that's what keeps me going every day, and also that's something that has kept me very, very hopeful right now. Yeah, that's it, Felipe. Thank you so much again, also for inviting me.
Thank you, and thank you for helping us wrap this in such a positive place. Isn't that nice? We don't just end with the challenges, we end with a great sort of quote of it. Thank you everyone for joining us. If I can just take a few minutes to really appreciate everyone who's on this call, both Lizou, who joined us, and George, who joined us for the opening, everyone who made this possible from Without Borders, Yannick from the Jamaican Perma, Vitorino, and George from the Portuguese, Gala from the Dominican Republic, Romeral also from the Youth of Us, Amen as a youth representative in Ethiopia. It's been an absolute pleasure to moderate this. We are very much looking forward to bringing this in our future activities. As was mentioned by Georges, our Model UN Summit is on the 15th of April, 2025 in New York. That is already planned. You can pre-register already, and we'll be engaging with everyone on this call and maybe not every single permanent representation of the UN to try and push for more of this work. And so we're really, really proud to be working with everyone here to do that. Wishing everyone here the absolute best. This will, of course, be online. Please do share your thoughts and comments and reach out to anyone in this panel for more. And have, wherever you are, a wonderful rest of your UN Day. Thanks again.
Thank you, Philippe.